Hey guys, Palsteron here, and today let's talk about my top 10 league starters for patch 3.20 Forbidden Sanctum. The following builds will be in no particular order. I think all of these are able to clear all of the content that is required for a league starter, which for me is everything up to Uber bosses. When it comes to Uber bosses, it's a lot about how good you are at boss mechanics, so it's pretty hard to draw a distinction there. Now, all the creators and their builds will be linked down below in the description. Something I want to mention before we start is that the most important thing when it comes to picking a build, especially for your league start, having a good entry into the league, is pick something that you actually like. Even if there maybe is a build that's better than whatever you want to play, just test out stuff. That's how you get good at the game. That's how you get experience. And this game really isn't that competitive unless you're a racer, so just have fun. Explore. This is a sandbox game. I just wanted to point that out, but yeah, let's get into the list. Number one is Pox's Righteous Fire. Now, this build is just incredibly fun to play, and it's also incredibly easy to gear. Righteous Fire is an area damage over time effect around you, and you're basically just shield charging around, killing and exploding enemies, while also having something like a fire trap against single target. This build is kept up to date by a fellow content creator called Pox, and he really puts a lot of time and effort into his POBs, as well as him having an actual wiki for the build. So any question that you might have is already answered. This has been a build that has been tried and true over the last, I don't know, 10 plus leagues. Now, this is also a very hardcore friendly build. It's very tanky. It has good regeneration. As for downsides, I guess I would say the single target damage is not up to par with some of the other builds on this list, but usually that doesn't really matter because it's not like they're going to kill you most of the time. You can just face tank bosses and just kind of chill. And yeah, once again, this is one of the longest standing and probably safest builds that you can league start with. Then we have the Corrupting Fever champion. Corrupting Fever is a duration buff that basically allows your attacks to apply a physical damage over time, which means you can use long range attacks like Kinetic Blast to apply those dots and completely explode whole screens. This is probably the build with the best clear speed on the whole list. It's just absolutely insane how you can annihilate maps. It feels kind of like a end game build with the investment of a early game build. It has big range, it has bleed explosions, champion is incredibly tanky on top. However, it's not without downside. Your single target damage overall is pretty weak. However, for how good of a clear you get, it's pretty damn strong. And if you're somebody who's fine with, for example, buying boss completions, this build will definitely carry you, and you'll be a lot faster through maps than some of the other builds on this list. Then we have the Explosive Arrow Ballista Elementalist. Explosive Arrow is a bow projectile skill that whenever it hits an enemy will stick a fuse into it. These fuses can stack up to 20, and after a duration of 1 second, there is an explosion, which is bigger and stronger depending on how many fuses you were able to stick into that enemy. This is a build I've played over several leagues, and I can say it is pretty remarkable. It's extremely solo self-fun friendly because it doesn't require any gear really. It basically has huge damage without needing any uniques or any specific crafts. Therefore, it's also very new player friendly, and on top of that, you also quite easily get defensive auras into your build like Grace, Determination, 100% spell suppression. So on that end, you're also pretty good. Now, as downsides, the recovery of the build is a little sketchy. You will mostly use life flasks, as well as that some people just do not really like the Ballista playstyle, as there can be like delayed damage, and some people just like to kind of deal the damage themselves. As well as that, if you want to play this build on hardcore, I would probably recommend the champion version. The Elementalist version is plenty tanky, but on hardcore, you really don't want to take your chances. You want all the defenses that you can get. Overall, an extremely fun build, especially with the huge ignite proliferations that you'll be able to get on very low gear. Then we have the Poison Blade Vortex Occultist. Now, this spell creates ethereal blades that spin around you whenever you activate it, and it can stack up to 10 times, increasing its damage with every stack. So basically the playstyle that you have is you sometimes press Blade Vortex and then you just shield charge around and explode screens. Occultist's Profane Bloom and Plague Bearer make for huge explosions and basically not really having to press any buttons, which is probably the biggest upside of this build. All you really have to do is press the Blade Vortex button here or there and you will just destroy everything, rush through maps. Now, the downsides is this build can be a little bit squishy if not built into it correctly. In endgame, this is not really a problem anymore once you have your gear, but before that, it can be a little annoying. Also, it doesn't have the best boss damage, but then again, it is poison, so it has a lot of solutions to that. I think this build is especially good if you want a build that's pretty damn solid early, but then you can also scale later and you don't have to reroll immediately. Then we have the Poison Seismic Trap Saboteur. Seismic Trap is a duration trap. You throw it down and once it's triggered, it releases a number of waves over a duration. This build has really nice AoE. It is an incredibly strong bosser. And one of its biggest upsides is that it doesn't really need that much gear to deal damage. So that is incredibly helpful for example, solo self-found players. Also, your damage potential is huge, which means you can cut a lot of the damage nodes, get more defenses, making this a prime build for hardcore. Now, the clear can be a little sketchy and a little bit clunky, but overall it is helped out by Exanguinate traps. And also, on top of that, some people just do not really like the trap playstyle. You have to throw them down. They have to be triggered. So, yeah, whatever floats your boat. This build is incredible, though. Then we have the Poisonous Concoction Pathfinder. Poisonous Concoction is a unarmed attack that throws explosive bottles of your flasks on enemies. These explosions get stronger the better your life flasks are, as well as that these explosions can overlap, for example, against bosses. When people would ask me what kind of build I would recommend to a completely new player, this has to be on top of my list. Whenever you start out with the skill, you get it at level 12. You will basically just completely waltz through the game. Instead of constantly having to upgrade your weapon, you don't have to do anything. You're unarmed. Most of your damage will come from the gem itself. I would say this build is the ultimate all-rounder. It has good clear speed, decent bossing damage. It only falls off very late into the game because at that point you would like to upgrade your weapon, which you don't have. Other people are getting their crazy uniques or rares. However, if you want a more endgame focused version, you can definitely check out the Occultist version as well. I would say that overall Pathfinder is a lot more friendlier towards new players, especially because the first 30 levels are so much easier as a ranger. That being said, Poisonous Concoction is one of the most flexible builds ever. You can basically respec into whatever build you want, and ranger has a lot of options, so definitely check this one out. Then we have the Maw of Mischief Elementalist, which has Death Wish as its main skill. This is a channeling spell that whenever you activate it, you will over time sacrifice a certain amount of your minions. At the end, you will have a huge explosion and it will deal damage depending on how many minions you sacrificed. Now, out of all the builds on the list, I would say this has the highest damage potential out of all of them at pretty damn low gear levels. You won't really find a build that has a bigger ignite than this, and it will also prolife to nearby enemies while still being able to get a lot of tankiness through block, energy shield, and life. You should also be able to fit in most of the defensive auras on top of that. Now, clear speed is decent, I would say. There's definitely a lot of sacrifices to be made for having this high of a single target damage. The clear speed isn't something to write home about. It's like the proliferation kind of saves it, but overall, it's not as good as some of the other builds on the list. It can also be quite clunky to play, but having played it myself, I will say it kind of grew on me over time. It's definitely not something that you will just be able to click one button for. You will have to press several buttons. And another huge downside, especially for new players, is that you have to actually get the helmet. So if you're on solo self-found, there are divination cards to farm this helmet, but overall, it will be quite hard to acquire. They're not that expensive at Leaguestart usually, but it always depends on the meta. Then we have the Boneshatter Slayer. Boneshatter is a melee strike skill that whenever you hit an enemy, it also hits you back for a certain amount of physical damage. But in response to that, you also get trauma stacks. And the more trauma stacks you have, the more damage your next hit will deal, and so forth and so forth. You get more and more trauma stacks. Now, this build actually has great clear for a melee build, and it's probably the only melee build that I'm comfortable putting onto this list. But just for a little bit more information, there has been a few Val skills that look quite interesting. I just didn't want to take any chances. The build has incredible defenses. You get a ton of armor and a ton of regeneration with Slayer's Overleach, recovering you thousands and thousands of life per second. A little bit of a downside here is that with most melee builds, you need a little bit of crafting knowledge to get your weapons going, or at least know how to trade for them. Now, this build is not the greatest bosser ever, and that's mostly because it's just so melee, and quite a few of the very endgame bosses are not that forgiving when you're just standing in front of it. If you're a good player and you know boss mechanics, that is no problem whatsoever, but for a lot of people, this will be not the best choice. However, if you want to be a beefy melee boy, this is the way to go. Then we have the Caustic Arrow Poison Ballista Trickster. Caustic Arrow is a bow projectile that spreads caustic ground whenever it hits an enemy. What a lot of people don't know is that this actually has a hit portion which deals decent damage, But the big upside is it can actually overlap, meaning you can ×7 to ×9 your damage on something like bosses while still having great area of effect against everything else. And this makes it so you have a lot better damage potential, and you can actually use Caustic Arrow as a main skill. Now, the advantage of this build is that for a Ballista build, it's actually one of the faster ones. You don't really have delayed damage like you would have on an Explosive Arrow Ballista build. This build also has incredible single target, especially once you get some of your endgame gear. This is definitely one of those League starters that you can push all the way into uber bosses. Also, a big thing is the Trickster Ascendancy solves one of the biggest problems that Ballista builds usually have, which is life recovery. Trickster's Polymath node basically takes away all your worries when it comes to that. And then at the end, I want to quickly mention minion builds. Now, it seems like minion builds are not in the best state currently. I'm not really sure which build I would link to, and I'm also not very knowledgeable about them. However, I will link you to 3 content creators that I usually look at when I think about minions, which is Ghazzy, The Game Report, and Von Vikton. So if you are somebody who likes minion builds, then definitely follow their channels and see what they push out for the new leaks. But that's it for the top 10 list. Now, there's a lot of builds I didn't mention here. There's obviously a plethora more. All of them are viable. Please don't get butthurt if your build is not on here. It is really just top 10 of what I could think of. Once again, all the creators and builds will be linked down below in the description. Subscribe if you liked the video. I don't know, follow me on twitch.tv/Palsteron if you want to hang out at Leaguestart together, as well as that, maybe, I don't know, follow me on twitter.com/Palsteron. But yeah, hope you enjoyed the video, and since I still don't have a slogan, see you next time.